All right. What if there was an Xbox carve out from Microsoft? And so in a previous Pixels and Profits episode, we did hypothesize that Microsoft is going all in on Game Pass, the subscriptions business, and that this could potentially, I think, Matthew, you're the one who mentioned this might be the last generation of Xbox hardware, depending on how things pan out. So, in this first scenario, I wanted to discuss what if Microsoft spins out its Xbox business? What would that look like? Who could be potential suitors to take over the business? What would be advantages, disadvantages to Microsoft? And is this even a good idea or not? Today's episode is sponsored by Data.ai to access estimates for rankings, downloads, revenue, usage, or engagement for millions of apps on the App Store and Google Play. Sign up for Data.ai. Before we dive into the what if scenario, for our audience, I thought it'd be good to also just cover some of the economics. So I'll provide some context for the audience. So we're doing this for you guys regarding how they should think about console economics. And Matthew and Brian, feel free to jump in to add additional color as necessary. And I think that in terms of public information, we can only partially characterize the Xbox business because there isn't full information disclosure from Microsoft around Xbox. But I think we can kind of get partially there. And for the audience, if you were to look at a Microsoft, 10K or 10Q, the financial statements generally will break out their revenue in terms of three groups. First is productivity and business processes. Second is intelligent cloud. And three, something that's called more personal computing. And gaming is part of this last part, more personal computing. And the information that Microsoft does disclose there is revenue data, but not profitability information from those Microsoft public disclosures. And Brian and Matthew, maybe I could just pause here. In terms of public information, is this the best that we have in terms of finding out more about the console business? Is there anything else that people should be looking at if they wanted to know more?
I mean, just from the financial statements, yeah, that's the most you're going to get. Microsoft does give a little bit more color in terms of the relative growth rates of hardware versus what they call
Right.
software and services, which is all the first party software plus the platform fees on third party plus Game Pass.
Yeah.
There are some estimates out there from like Newzoo that try to kind of guesstimate just the software and services piece, but that's still not like a pure first party software or a pure Game Pass number. That kind of is their estimate of all of that together. So we're talking guesstimates here. No one really has the real
Right.
number except for Amy Hood basically and Phil Spencer. Amy Hood is the
Sure.
CFO of Microsoft. But yeah, I mean, most of the revenue hardware fluctuates depending on the cycle. Most of the revenue is software and services. Game Pass, we can kind of benchmark the revenue because they give subscribers. I think the last update was 25 million. And I can't remember if they said if Game Pass is profitable yet or not. I doubt it is, but um, that's another consideration.
They gave
Right.
some sort of revenue run rate for subscription businesses a quarter or two ago that was just exceeding $1 billion. And I guess the only other call I would make is that since the acquisition proposal for Activision, they've been forced to disclose some competitive data that's mostly redacted and things like that, but learning some incremental bits here and there that we'll probably chat about throughout this conversation.
Okay. And in these financial documents, the way that Microsoft defines gaming is, and I'll just read this off. They say including Xbox hardware and Xbox content and services comprising first and third party content, including games and in-game content, Xbox Game Pass and other subscriptions, Xbox Cloud Gaming, third party disc royalties, advertising, and other cloud services. So yeah, there's a few different sources of revenue there. If you were to look at some of the financial statements, gaming, just for the audience, I'll read out. Looks like made in 2020, meaning the year ending June 30th of 2020, made about 11.6 billion in revenue. Then 2021 jumped up to 15.4 billion, and then in 2022, last year, about 16.2 billion. So there was a big jump from 20 to 21, and it was less of a jump from 21 to 22. Now, just checking their last quarter, meaning the last publicly disclosed quarter, meaning ending March 31st, what we see in gaming is that relative to 2022, 23 is down. So in 2022, it was they made 3.7 billion in that first quarter, and it's down to about 3.6 billion. So in their financial statements, they suggest that it decreased 133 million or 4%, driven by a decline in Xbox hardware. Xbox hardware revenue decreased 30% on a strong prior year comparable. Matthew, do you have any additional color on that, or what do you think about that decline?
Oh, I would highlight that in the 9 months through March, because that's like the full period and it includes the holidays, which we know is big for consoles. Sales were also down, and I think the decline is a little bit narrow on a percentage basis. So like that's probably the slightly better comp here. But yeah, I mean the with supply catching up to demand in consoles, which is something we've talked about previously with both Microsoft and Sony, now we're kind of seeing what true demand looks like. And it turns out that if you don't have good first party games, true demand for consoles isn't necessarily there, right? Sony continues to sell more and sell through is higher than sell in because they have such great first party games. Xbox is clearly seeing hardware decline or slow down, at least decline from the peak, out of the launch window. And that's because of a lack of content. So we'll see if that picks up with Starfield and a few others. But I just wanted to point out that 9 month figure.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think to your point, Matthew, on first party content, I think to me, just my own personal opinion, but that's been the lesson in this last generation is that first party content matters. And if Xbox, I think, is going to try and be competitive in the future, I think they got to figure that out. There's got to be a reason why. Um, and just to characterize the economics, and you guys just feel free to jump in as Matthew and Brian mentioned, like we're able to gather together bits of information in terms of the profitability and economics of the console business based upon various data sources. So Matthew sent me a link from, I think it was iSupply, or I forget what the source was, but this source suggested that Xbox 360 Premium, so just going back a few generations, was priced $126 below its bill of materials. Bill of materials meaning all the component parts that it takes that Microsoft has to buy to actually put the Xbox together. And they suggest, quote, specifically, the total cost for the Xbox 360 Premium reaches $525, which is well above the retail price of $399. Now, in the last generation, just comparatively on the Sony side, there's a research firm called IHS that suggested PS4 carried a bill of materials cost of $372 plus $9 in manufacturing, leading to a total of $381 while selling for $399. But that still doesn't mean that they're profitable because you also have to add in a bunch of other expenses such as marketing, shipping, like the distribution or retail margin that you need to add. So Sony basically lost money on every console. It was rumored on PS3, Sony actually lost $200 per console. Brian and Matthew, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, console makers sell at a loss.
Right.
But as you said, this is bill of materials. So this is the estimate from these third parties like IHS or iSupply of the component costs. So it
Yeah.
doesn't include all of those other things that you mentioned. And it's not even just the overhead costs like marketing and R&D. It's also things like shipping and inventory costs and things
Yep.
that actually happen in the actual real world process of moving a box from where it's made, probably Taiwan or China, to wherever it's being sold. That actual process incurs costs as well.
Right.
Yeah,
So
there's
I
also a couple other ones there too. If we're going to get intricate, so like R&D, both for hardware and the software that lays
right,
on top of the hardware.
right,
Markham, we already discussed a bit. There's backend servers that they kind of lay into the cost of subscriptions and other various infrastructure things. So, I mean, it could even be 2x that BOM if you really want to get down to the nitty gritty to it. So they are losing a considerable amount of money up front. It's an investment in the
right,
ecosystem. Yep.
right. So the way to think about economics is to some degree, it's like you can think about it from a unitary economics perspective, meaning like let's say for a single Xbox, let's say you sell it for $500 and but you're losing $200, then like how do you make up that $200 gap per Xbox, right? And the way that you make that up is through all the other things that we kind of mentioned when we were describing in the financial statements, like the software royalty sales, the subscriptions, the DLC, all those other things that Microsoft can make money from. And again, just kind of scouring the internet for our audience here, the Motley Fool did a study on video game console makers, and they suggest that the royalty that that the console manufacturer makes is typically a $7 royalty per disc. So if you're selling a disc, like you're buying, Grand Theft Auto, well, actually, in the case of Grand Theft Auto, you'd make less. So, like a typical disc, they would make $7. But then, if it's a popular game like Call of Duty or Grand Theft Auto, then that royalty drops to $5. So then, the way to think about it is, okay. So let's say you have this, whatever it is, $100, $200, maybe more than $200. To Brian's point, then you're going to have to make that up by selling more and more software discs, some at $7 each, plus subscriptions, plus a bunch of other stuff. Matthew and Brian, any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would note that I think those numbers are the disk era. The numbers
Yeah,
are actually a lot higher in the digital download era.
right.
The platforms are getting, I think, $18 out of the 60. I guess it's, scale that to $70 SKUs now, right? But they're getting a much fatter margin because there's no retail margin, right? Historically, GameStop or Walmart or Costco, whoever was actually selling the game,
Yeah,
got a cut of the $12 between the 48 of net revenue that went to the publisher and the $60 gross price. So that $7 or $5 would go to the platform. Now the net revenue to the publisher is $42. It's more profitable revenue, and the profit dollars are higher. Again, scale this to 70. I just haven't run the math since numbers have gone up to 70, but
yeah,
they make a lot more money on digital is the short version of it. And at higher margin, there's no discs involved, and they get all the DLC and MTX, which
yep.
is all 100% margin on their cut of that, the 30% cut of that. And well, okay, maybe it's 99.9% margin because you need someone to count the money when it comes in.
Right. So a few trends are working in the console maker's favor. So to your point, the shift from physical to digital distribution, and then to the extent that you have DLC and free to play, and FIFA, Ultimate Football, whatever, it makes a ton of money in MTX. So I think that's all good news for the console makers. But yeah, they do have to make it up. And the other thing to note, just in terms of historical data, is that typical attach ratios, at least for the last generation, were something like 8 to 9. So meaning, like, let's say it's 9, then that would mean that you could take 9 multiplied by whether it's digital or physical, the $18 or the $7 or the $5, and then that would be more money to help offset the loss that you make from selling that initial hardware. So what do you guys think in terms of the attractiveness of the business and the like growth potential for console makers? It does seem to me that if you're able to get scale, and if you're able to, a lot of these trends are going in your favor, that you can have a very good business, but it would require scale. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I'd say like the hardware business standalone is not super attractive, generally speaking, because of all the things you just mentioned. And hardware for investors is an extraordinarily tough sell. They want recurring revenue streams, and
Yeah,
it's also very hard to compete on price. Um, this also wouldn't be a business you could acquire and just be lazy on. It would need a ton of energy and continued vigor to grow the installed base and increase like product differentiation, including software versus Sony and Nintendo to a degree, even though they kind of play in different niches. The acquirer would also really need a deep understanding of hardware manufacturing, strong relationships with a variety of manufacturers, including casings and semis and memory and assembly, and then not even to mention logistics and shipping. So, if we're talking about the full-on business, right? Like if we're talking about Microsoft carving out the Xbox gaming business, it's an extraordinary large business, and I think we'll probably get a little bit deeper into that. But it's that is attractive, right? But it would also be a very big ticket for an acquirer, and it would also just be something that I think would be a lot easier just to float on the public markets. You already have an installed CEO that's quite good and good with investors, good at managing his organization. But like, I think we'd probably discuss why they would do that next. But so I'll leave it there and kick it over to Matt.
Yeah, no, I agree with everything Brian just said. I do think that this could stand on its own as a standalone business, which I think is part of the reason Microsoft likes it, because it can stand alone and it's its own. I think it's too big to be acquired by pretty much everyone, because anyone that's big enough to acquire it, antitrust gets in the way and they can't do it. So like, that's really the only option to spin it out, is actually spin it out and separately list it, which isn't the craziest idea if you're a Microsoft shareholder and you want Microsoft to purely be an enterprise company. Satya Nadella has explicitly said he wants to build consumer subscriptions. So, Satya disagrees with you, at least from that perspective, if you want that. But, I do think that, particularly with MTX in live services games, I remember back when Fortnite came out and you looked at the financials of Xbox and Sony and how much money they were printing because of Fortnite on console, right? And that's not even their own game. They're just collecting checks. You see similar things with, battle royales like Warzone and other like that, right? So it's clear that this is a great business. Being the platform, being the gatekeeper is a fantastic business. The loss up front is to protect that profit pool.
Yeah, maybe I could push back a little bit, Brian, in terms of like, is Phil Spencer a good CEO and leader for this team? Because like to some degree, he kind of missed the first party content side of this. And also I would say like there's this other aspect that I think about, which is should I kind of feel like Game Pass is kind of fighting the console business itself, right? Because Game Pass wants to be everywhere. The console business, at least in my opinion, is that the console business wants to have exclusive first party content. And so they're kind of a little bit at odds. So I guess my question would be, how do you guys feel about kind of like the miss on Phil Spencer's side, leading Xbox to really drive first party content as Nintendo and Sony have done? And then also, should Game Pass and Xbox actually be separated? What do you guys think?
I think that it's way too early to judge Phil Spencer. I don't think he's been given the remit to do what he wants until very recently. I think
Okay.
2022 when he was named CEO of of
Okay.
Xbox, right?
Fair.
Before that he was reporting up to someone within the devices business. So even though he was on the board, like he was on the senior decision making and he ran the gaming business, he still had a boss that wasn't Satya Nadella. Now he reports directly to Satya. I think that's a big difference in terms of the structure and his ability to make decisions. And we all know that even if you go back to in 2017 when he was made that role, decisions on content are take 3 years, right? So we wouldn't even see the impact of some of his choices until 2020, 2021 because of COVID delays. So in reality, we only have a couple years at best to really judge him on. You can definitely judge him and say that recent releases have been delayed, they've been buggy, they haven't been up to quality, and you're almost getting to the Ubisoft point where they need to just execute and shut up. And Starfield's going to be a big test for them, but
Sure.
I think it's way too early to, you know, say that he's not the right person. I think people respect him and think that he is the right leader for the business. Um, in terms of separating Game Pass from the rest of the business, I don't think that's possible.
Hmm.
Um, I think if anything, Microsoft wants Game Pass to be the only portion of the gaming business alongside just being the platform for it for commissions. But I mean, Game Pass is the future of this business. I think Microsoft's going to live or die by that.
Yeah, I agree with Matt. You think you really do have to divide the Phil Spencer era into maybe even three different sections, right? And the most recent being his promotion to CEO, and before that, the elevation of Satya to CEO, where they did fully embrace gaming. They've made a lot of acquisitions in the past 3 or 4 years. There was a one E3 where they announced five or so, and then following on to that, obviously Bethesda, ZeniMax. So there's a lot more content there. And like to Matt's point, it does take a good chunk of time to start churning out high end hits. They built a subscription business. They've also tied in services with Azure and other things that are really important to the overall structure of the business. So yeah, time will tell. I think what I do like about Phil is that he is really a part of gaming culture. I think people know him, including gamers. He positions himself as gamer friendly and gamer first and consumer first. And I guess the other notion is that he's also very self-reflective and willing to admit his own mistakes. There's very few CEOs that'll go out there and say, "Hey, we made a mistake with Redfall. It won't happen again." and that sort of thing. So I do like that he takes the bullet himself and doesn't pass it on to somebody else. And I guess that's what's some a good feature to look for in a CEO, particularly one that would be operating in a public market setting.
And what do you think about?
Acquisitions that don't get a lot of credit for Xbox, I'd throw PlayFab out there. People forget that they acquired PlayFab, which is, all back end stuff, but I think really was valuable for what they're trying to build.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not a huge fan, but yeah, strategically, yes. I don't know, the specific implementation execution of it, but and Brian, what do you think about Game Pass and Xbox together? Like again, from my perspective, it's like they're kind of competing. Like I feel like Game Pass wants to put content on multiple platforms, and the console strategy should be to just keep it on the Xbox. What do you think?
Yeah, I think if I had my druthers on a subscription service for gaming, it would be a great repository for aged content, things that people want to go back and experience that was out 3 or 4 years ago or whatever. I don't want to see a future where we're judging the success of new titles on engagement and things like that, or subscription lift. It kind of puts us in this like Netflix content scenario, and I think we've all seen the path that sorts of like just regular TV and movie programming have gone. It's very hard to judge success without fundamentals of revenue and launch, and I think it just changes the gaming dynamic for the worse. I think it has an impact on personnel and jobs and cost cutting and all this other stuff. So I do not want to see a future where the vast majority of games that are launched from some of the best studios in the world are not priced at full price and monetized as they are now. I guess that's the only cut.
I'm with you. I think that the structure that Microsoft is building with Game Pass actually is probably the best for as a consumer. I have it. It's you get the first party content when it comes out. Great. Like that's valuable. You get a catalog of older games. I played through all the Yakuza catalog at one point just because it was there. That was fun. And then there's a whole bunch of indie games that I would never otherwise pay for. Now, on PC, if you're on Steam, you might pay like, their discount or whatever, but I'm mostly a console gamer. I never used to buy those games. Now I'll experiment with them and play with them. Like Overcooked was fun during COVID, and that was in there. Games like that I probably would never pay for in the first place, but because they're there, I played them and they were fun. And hopefully, a developer got some royalties because I played it.
Yeah, I don't know. For me, I'm still negative on Game Pass overall, just because it not only fights the console business, but I also think Game Pass fights live operated hit titles. So, when I think about the game behavior of uh, kids that I see and like my own kids, it's like certain titles that are, whether it's Fortnite or League of Legends or Valorant, or, certain games just take up all their time, and like getting them to play some of the back catalog or small indie titles is kind of like more of a band-aid rather than like the true solution. Or so I don't know, I'm a little bit, for me, I'm a little bit negative on that, and I do think that one advantage to carving out Xbox business is maybe the hardware part or the platform part could be independent, and that could be disassociated from the subscription Game Pass part, whose objective would be to be on as many platforms as possible. But
I will say that, one of the third party games in Game Pass is MLB The Show, which is made by a Sony studio. And
sure.
I play it on Xbox because I don't have to pay for it because I'm already paying for Game Pass as opposed to paying $70 plus the premium if you're getting the premium edition on PlayStation. And I still spent ridiculous, way too much money on freaking card packs for what I forget what they call it. I haven't played it. I haven't played the new one because of my stupid exams, but the last year's version, like just that it's the equivalent of their FUT model, their FIFA Ultimate Team, the equivalent model. They have the card packs and you try to get all the players, right? And
Yeah.
it doesn't stop me from spending on that. It just, Microsoft is eating the cost to Sony, or MLB got involved as far as I know, but it's just like, I think that there's more to it than just a catalog of indie games. I think even live services games, premium live services games, bringing that down to a lower price point by amortizing that cost across more titles you can still see significant live services revenue and monetization.
Okay. And so, just to hammer home this point, I know this is a what if scenario, so to some degree, we're kind of implicitly assuming that it just gets carved out. But is this a good idea? What do you guys? Is it should my like even in today's in a real practical scenario, should Microsoft consider carving out the Xbox business? And what would be the advantages, disadvantages?
Yeah, I don't think it's something that they would ever proactively institute outside of a scenario where they have to choose between being a publisher and a developer of games and a and a major player in games distribution. And I don't think that the Activision transaction would impact that in any direction. Microsoft might not be knocking the cover off the ball in hardware sales or market share versus Sony and Nintendo, but the Xbox business still gives them, a seat at the table to distribute high margin software to their installed base. And like while they're losing the hardware battle at the moment, the installed base is still pretty substantial. It's also very present in the PC ecosystem as the dominant OS, but that ecosystem is just vastly different than mobile ecosystems. The winners there are the large launcher platforms like Steam or in-house launchers like Blizzard or Epic to a degree. I think it really comes down to Microsoft's long-term commitment to gaming. And if at some point in time they wanted to do a spin out of the entire gaming business, like we discussed, it wouldn't really even need a buyer. Like we said, it's like this could be spun out in public markets and it would probably be pretty successful, especially if it included Activision. But why go through the hassle of buying Activision if your design is just to spin it out again? It seems like a lot of financial shenanigans when that doesn't really speak to Microsoft's long-term strategy or leadership style.
Well, John Malone just perked up in the chat, but if you want to talk about financial engineering, if this was a Liberty company, but I mean, if I just do some napkin math, and I'm a huge fan of napkin math on trailing 12-month numbers, even if you assume they only did a 10% EBIT margin on the trailing 12-month revenue, Sony's like 20+% on their total gaming business. So I'm haircutting Xbox substantially.
Yeah.
And you put a 20 times EBIT multiple, which I don't think is unreasonable. You're looking at a 30+ billion company. Like that's not a small pill for anyone to swallow,
Yeah.
except for one of these mega caps. And then you get into the antitrust issues. Like not even Netflix. I mean, Netflix makes sense. I think Brian, you wanted to get into that, but like they can't afford that. It depends on what the cash flows of Xbox actually look like and what the leverage looks like pro forma. We'd have to see more numbers, but like there's really no deal that could happen financially that makes sense and that gets through antitrust.
We also have to go into the assumption that like most of the people that could acquire this business are like they're bitter rivals, right? Like they're trying to kill each other in some of their highest growth and highest margin businesses. Like Amazon and Microsoft directly compete with AWS versus Azure. Long storied history of Google and Microsoft competing over everything from web browsers to enterprise cloud search. So it's like at that point in time, they'd probably rather just shut it down and sell it to Amazon or Google. But I mean, I just don't see a scenario where that would take place.
Right.
So I don't think that Microsoft will do this. This is a what if. The odds of them getting rid of the business, I think, are low. But if they did, I think a spin out is really the only viable option.
Right. But to some degree, though, like in a previous Pixels episode, Matthew, you had suggested this might be the last, generation of Xbox hardware. So, if that's the case, then why wouldn't they consider, spinning it out or selling the business or something?
Well, I think they want to generate consumer subscription services, and Game Pass is that, right? I mean, Game Pass is the only one they
Okay, so
have right now.
you're saying that the gaming business just becomes hardware less, and it's just all about subscriptions.
It's hardware agnostic. You run it on whatever device. We're getting to a point where cloud gaming actually could be somewhat of a thing, whether you're running it on a smart TV or you're just running it on a PC.
Right.
There's lots of devices that can handle the computing power for gaming nowadays at a reasonable level of fidelity, especially for average games. And if Microsoft is the one doing this, they can fine tune the fidelity to fit that distribution, particularly to smartphones potentially. And so, I think that over time, that's at least where Satya wants to get to, where you're not reliant on the hardware access device. You're just available on as many devices as possible. Now, will that technically work? It's still probably several years from being able to do that at the highest fidelity possible. But remember, I don't think console gamers have ever been after the latest and greatest, highest fidelity possible. I mean, if you want that, you play on PC and you spend thousands of dollars on a graphics card. You're not doing that on a console anyway. So I think when you're thinking about the audience for console, it's shooters and sports mostly, and a little bit of racing, and then everything else is a rounding error. Like the you don't need a 4090 Ti from Nvidia graphics card to play FIFA, right? You need something that's moderately good to do it.
There's
Yeah, but
also some other like lighter capex ways they could approach this, and I'm just off the top of my head, they could do more like an Android model where they are white labeling their software and services to like Chinese manufacturers or other
oh,
folks that could build boxes or lighter clients with cloud streaming enabled if we weren't all the way there yet, especially for like countries where there's not super fast broadband. So that would alleviate them the pressure of developing hardware, selling hardware and such, but also be able to get some revenue out of that and hold on to distribution and subscriptions, which is the most important thing to them.
There's already Samsung TVs with Game Pass as an app on them now. Like it's already happening today. Now,
right.
I haven't tried it, so I don't know what the experience is like playing it relative to on a console in terms of latency and things like that. But
Yeah.
like it exists today.
Yeah, but but can't you imagine like if Microsoft were all in on Game Pass and if they were thinking about, okay, well, we don't need this hardware business anyway, then why not just sell it off or spin it out?
The hardware,
Yeah.
no one will buy the hardware by itself. I mean, the hardware bleeds money, and not to mention the R&D to do it. To Brian's point, the
Right.
best thing to do would just be to open source all of the tech they've built and let, Foxconn and Pegatron and all the
Yeah, well,
transformers
yeah.
white label it.
So I understand there's like the Android model, but there's also the model of just like selling off the not necessarily just the it's the platform business, right? The hardware plus you own the interface where you can sell, the
Well,
MTX.
I don't think you lose that by focusing on Game Pass, because you can have both. You can be a distribution platform like Steam. You can just be a software client distribution platform, and you can be the subscription on top of it.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess my point was like if you were thinking, Matthew, that okay, this might be the last generation of Xbox. If they go all in on Game Pass and then just decide to go Game Pass, and it's like, okay, we're going to get rid of this hardware anyway, and then why not just let it go off?
No, no. So when I say all
Okay.
in on Game Pass, I like the platform business is still a thing. You just convert that to a digital platform from a physical box, right? So you're still going to clip coupons on third party games, and then you're also going to make money from subscriptions.
Right, but you're sitting on like someone else. Like if you're on Game Pass, you're sitting on someone else's hardware, right? So it'd be Game Pass in on a PlayStation or on a PC or on someone else's
Does
hardware.
Razer get commissions when I buy a game on Steam for my Razer computer? I mean,
Unfortunately, not.
right. I
Yeah.
mean, so I don't think this is anything that's not
Yeah.
analogous to the PC market. It's basically making the console business look more like the PC business.
Okay.
Yeah, it seems like the only way that hardware is palatable in this generation of tech is whenever
Yeah.
you have some sort of distribution. And this goes back to like the HPE and HPQ spinoff, right? Like printer business is absolute garbage until you charge them for ink every 3 months or have it show up on their doorstep. It's pretty much the same thing in gaming.
Okay.
It actually also, I mean, we can go way down the rabbit hole, but like I
Yeah.
actually just came to my head, like Nvidia could actually like make um, a quasi console, but the similar to a gaming PC, the parts are replaceable. So you don't need a gaming PC if you want to play on a console like experience, but it has the latest and greatest hardware. Like there's things that could actually happen that could be very interesting. There would be rounding errors for Nvidia, but like interesting things could be done to open up the hardware ecosystem
Yeah.
if Xbox decided to go that route.
Okay. So let's say, and it sounds like what you guys are saying is that, spitting out the hardware business doesn't make sense. But assuming if it did, you guys also mentioned like potential acquirers are quite limited. I mean, you definitely need a lot of cash to operate this business and things like that. Who could be potential acquirers, if any? I actually like the NVIDIA idea, Matthew, but like, um, anyone else?
Well, I don't think anyone necessarily acquire the hardware business, because what are you buying? You're buying supplier relationships and you're buying some IP. Like I think Microsoft could just either open source or license the IP around the Xbox and some of the software, and then say, all of you white label ODMs in China and Taiwan,
Sure.
you can go make your own, and we'll give you the software, and we'll take and you can use our software inside of your own box. And here's some of the IP that we built to make the box work. And Foxconn and Pegatron and Wistron and all the transformers, they'll go out and build those boxes. NVIDIA could do something with a high end, flavor to it. Sure, AMD could. Logitech probably will jump in because they seem to chase everything. But like I think that could be interesting for them. So you wouldn't be selling it, but you could
So you
license some
like
of
the
the
Android
software and
model,
IP.
basically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've thought about this a bit, and I do think if you just spoke to CEOs of large tech companies that said, "Hey, if you could just have Microsoft's gaming business and everything that came along with it, would you take it?" And I think there's probably five or six that'd be like, "Absolutely, yes." At some certain price, this would be absolutely fitting into our ecosystem. Like Amazon, for instance. I always thought Amazon. It would be interesting to see them involved in the gaming ecosystem in a more material way. Um, they have a hardware presence organically and through acquisition, whether it be through like tablets or home security, Alexa devices. They've tried smartphones and things like that. And at one point in time, I thought it would be interesting to see Amazon push into the market with a gaming PC, maybe even under like the Twitch brand or the Prime brand. But the Twitch brand isn't quite what it used to be, 4 or 5 years ago when I was dreaming about this stuff every night. They have had competition from YouTube and like newer ingress from companies like Kick, which might be a flash in the pan, but they're attracting top streamers at the moment. And it's probably their biggest new competitor since like Beam, which Microsoft acquired and shuttered back in the day. But again, like they're bitter rivals, right? And Google, they tried to jump right into streaming with Stadia with a bunch of partnerships, but no real killer first party content. And again, I have a hard time thinking Microsoft would work with a huge mega cap that they compete with for investors as much as any other things. Google also tries to compete with Microsoft in productivity and enterprise cloud. They killed them in desktop browser and search until recently when Bing is kind of coming alive again with AI assisted search. Um, Netflix is another one that's out there. This is extraordinarily difficult from a financial perspective to acquire. They do want to get bigger in gaming. They've shown some propensity to spend on really good talent and first party content to a degree. They have this kind of mobile thing going on. Um, and there's very little competitive overlap in that instance too. But again, this would be a very very large transaction for someone like Netflix. It would have to be nearly all stock, and I just you just there's just not a lot of companies that can take down a business with $20+ billion in revenue, especially after Activision.
Yeah. I like those ideas, especially Amazon. I think NVIDIA would be super interesting. But
I think that's
anyway,
gonna be more like partnerships than like closed
yeah.
door deals with like some sort of price attached. Because if Microsoft did want to offload it, they have amazing partnerships with like NVIDIA already in several different areas. It would just kind of be one of those things where they organically work it out into being more of a long-term partnership with revenue share and make it easy on everybody
Yeah.
else.
Well, there you
And
have
I'll
it.
just note before we move on, like when I said the price tag is like 30 billion, I did that
Yeah.
without Activision. Like, Microsoft is paying 69 billion, which is overvalued versus current valuations in the market, but like that's still a business with 40% EBIT margin. So,
Yeah.
even though it's 8 billion, 9 billion of revenue, it's 40% EBIT margins. You're more than doubling Xbox's EBIT by adding Activision to it, probably. And so, you're doubling, if not more, the price tag that would have to be paid. So as a standalone business, it could stand
It's
up and be
huge.
cool, especially with Activision, but it no one can afford that.
Yeah. All right. Well, there you have it. Scenario number one. What if Xbox carve out? And those are the thoughts from the Pixel Brothers. Maybe I'll pass it over to you, Brian, to talk about our second what if scenario.